we're going to talk about money. And the first question, we had a lively discussion about this afterwards. Really, we wanted to talk about what excites you when you look at a company that you want to invest in. And the challenge is to answer the question without using the word innovation and to not be so specific as we can't understand what they mean. So I'm going to talk to each one of you. Could you please take it in turn to answer that question?
Great. Well, as we're thinking about the war on cancer, a first thing that we need to start with is to recognize that cancer is several thousand different diseases. So you asked what excites me is we don't understand all of several thousand different cancers right now, but for really one of the first time, more and more subsets of those cancers we're beginning to actually understand. What's going wrong with those cancers? We can read the programming code, we can see what the software bugs are. And beyond that, have learned an enormous amount and are learning more about how the immune system is interacting with those cancers and in what configurations you're likely to have a productive immune response or not. The bottom line of all those pieces, and again, to be clear, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done. But for ever more of this subset of these 2,000 cancers, we're beginning to actually understand mechanistically what's going wrong, why does that cancer exist in this patient, and that then connects to what can you do about it. And that gives you the basis of trying to create a drug.
And that's interesting because I'm hearing a lot of this as sort of biology as software kind of thing at the moment, with Microsoft, with, all the sort of investments people are sort of saying, well, biology is...
That whole Microsoft thing, I got to say, right, that caused a lot of jaws to drop,
Really?
At least in the biotech
Why?
side of the world.
We will come to you too, don't worry, I haven't forgotten.
Well, I think they said they're going to cure cancer in 10 years.
Isn't that what you guys have been doing for the last 10 years?
So I wish that would be true more than anything in the world. Cancer is an incredibly difficult foe. And it's an evolving foe so that whenever we do something, whether it's a precision medicine drug, whether it's an immuno-oncology drug, it evolves. It evolves on us. But fundamentally, we are learning just an enormous amount more about what it is. And again, it's not all cancers. Cancers are 2,000 different diseases or more. But in subsets of it, we're beginning to actually understand what's going on. And when we understand what's going on, then we can create the right interventions and have tremendous effects for the patients.
Peter.
All right, so I'll build on what you just said with an analogy. I believe that it is ultimately the role of a lot of new companies, startups, if you will, to come up with new types of tools that ultimately will be assimilated by the large pharma companies out there that are putting together the toolkits and have defined themselves by the problem they aim to solve. So it used to be that you could make a drug that worked really well in a particular cancer, and you could generate significant revenues from that and become a commercial entity from that. And I think that now odds are you'll be acquired and your drug will be assimilated into a toolkit by Roche, Novartis, Bristol Myers, Pfizer. And the number of permutations that are possible when you're putting these different tools together. Think of a car mechanic trying to solve, something that's wrong with your car, with your engine. They're mixing and matching a torque wrench and a pair of pliers and a screwdriver and all sorts of tools. If you invent a new type of tool, that tool is going to be most valuable to an existing mechanic. You're not going to be able to compete with the mechanics with that one tool. And so if you can understand what the gaps are in the tool set that these large companies have, then someday you will have a potential partner or an acquirer, but you will fit with what they're doing. And now all of their R&D spend, which dramatically eclipses, the combined R&D spend of just the top 6 pharma that do oncology research is something on the order of, I think, $40 billion, right? And not all of that goes to cancer, but if so much as a quarter of it does, $10 billion per year, that's far more than any cancer moonshot budget. And so if you can ultimately be useful to those large companies, understand what their problems are as they try to come up with the various solution sets, the combinations and sequences of drugs that will have the greatest impact for patients, then you will be relevant. And if they fail to understand the utility of the drug you created, then while you may be convinced that you're right, you may even be right to the extent that one can be absolutely certain that they're right, you'll functionally be wrong because they failed to get the awesomeness. So you have to get noticed by the big companies. They have to ultimately see the merit of your research, and ultimately within their bureaucracies, they have to get the authorization to say, okay, let's make a move and buy that drug and now start using it. And then your invention will make a difference and will be on the right side of history. So we're trying to understand really the way that the mechanics themselves are tackling the problems. And we now have high-resolution X-rays of these car engines. We're no longer guessing by poking things on the outside and seeing which levers tick. And that X-ray, that's what genomics is, and other technologies.
I'm going to build on both of what Peter and Alexis said. And I think that this is probably the most exciting time to be involved in the fight on cancer and actually in medicine in general. Everything's changing. Everything is going upside down, topsy-turvy. One of the most exciting things is, although when we talk about investing, VC, where the money's going, and we had spoken briefly a little bit backstage, that a lot of it does go to pharma. What's happening in the digital health world and all around pharma is just as important. And I venture to say the cure for cancer isn't going to come out of just a single lab. It's not going to be just one drug that somebody says, oh, here's the magic bullet. As we know, cancer is a multitude of diseases. And each one can act very different. Sometimes they act similarly, sometimes they act different. The key is that we have to crunch the data. We have to collect the data, we have to look at the data, we have to figure out what works, what doesn't work. For years, clinical trials would report their results, but a lot of times clinical trials, a pharma company would start it and it wouldn't go so well, so they would just sort of dump the data, put it behind put it into a silo, or this didn't work, and they start something else. Well, all that data is important. We have to know what works and what doesn't work. So what excites me is watching companies develop that are trying to find different ways of whether it's engaging patients, engaging clinicians, doing patient compliance, and then being able to collect that data, analyze it, and truly change the way we fight cancer.
So it seems to me what you're all saying is that you're kind of looking for the kind of missing piece of a jigsaw almost. You're looking for a piece that you can add to a bigger picture. How difficult is it to, especially when you're talking about early stage investing, how difficult is it to know what's going to be missing 10 years from now, what's going to be important, after you've sunk quite a lot of money into it? Do you want to touch on all those? I know you start companies, and that's a slightly different thing from investing in companies that already exist. But if you could give me your perspective on that.
Well, the question you ask is how difficult is it? Of course, the answer is it's extraordinarily.
I'm the only person who can.
Hugely difficult. You've never seen something that's so difficult. And if you do it, it's beautiful. But you are, and it's a little bit to what Peter was saying, you're trying to understand what the world's going to look like. We find the best way to do this is very much just a pure focus on the patient. And you're trying to look for the fields of science and medicine, just as everybody was just talking about, where we actually think we're beginning to understand what's going on in that particular patient or that group of patients. And then you're saying, okay, are the pieces coming together that you can imagine if we create this drug, it's going to fit in. It's going to fit into a regimen. It's going to provide a benefit to that patient that is going to be utterly blow away. And I think that really comes down at the heart of it. We like to focus on places where you really understand what's going on at the disease. It's very important not to pretend you understand, because if you're pretending, if you don't really understand at the molecular mechanism level what's going on, then you're basically just gambling, just taking chances, because you can't see forward 10 years. But if you really understand what's going on in that disease, you can say, well, what pieces of the puzzle, of that jigsaw puzzle that you mentioned, what pieces exist, what pieces are missing, can I create a critical piece in that? And if you can do that, then you stand a very high probability of making a big difference for patients. And if you make a big difference for patients, in general, the value is going to follow.
But didn't they think that about RNAi? I mean, everyone thought that was going to be great, and then they were like, we can't deliver it.
Well, RNAi now is great.
Yeah.
So
it took a long time.
But that's a really, well, sure, a lot of the best stuff takes a long time. But to that point exactly, how do you know whether or not you're right about a mechanism, about even your interpretation of data, right? We read about in the press about how great experiments later turn out not to be reproducible. Maybe they were wrong. You know that the guys that invented cold fusion, they were like, nearly thrown off the planet for how silly that was. And years later, people realize, oh wait, we actually can reproduce, what they did. Now they've renamed it low energy nuclear reactions to sort of make it sound more credible. And those poor guys are, probably went nuts from, having been shamed like that. So that happens. That happens. You invent something great, you believe it, other people don't, right? And if you're lucky enough to have some investor that's, as naive as you are, to give you the money to pursue that, maybe you'll fail, but just maybe it'll work. And all of a sudden, everyone claims, oh yeah, I believe that. Immuno-oncology was a joke not that long ago. Now it's really credible. What does that say about any of our conviction in saying, oh, that'll never work? So within our team, we actually try to map out all of the innovation that's going on. We create these mind maps. They're colorful, and in the case of cancer, they're incredibly dense. Every company has its own node on this map. And when we evaluate candidates to hire onto our team, we have them make a map for us. And what we screen for is the kind of arrogance where someone says, oh, that'll never work. Because as investors, we can't take that attitude towards an entrepreneur. That's what it means to be an entrepreneur. Everyone tells you it'll never work. But if you're going to fund people like that, you have to be willing to be just a touch crazy like they are and believe that maybe it will work. Right? You have to take a chance. And if no one believes in that particular innovative project, then the valuation will probably be low because you're not competing with a lot of other investors. And later, when you're proven right, a lot of value is created. Right? So I think it's important to have the humility to accept the possibility that our interpretation of the science, as much as I hate the idea that science requires interpretation, surely it's right or wrong. But no, it requires interpretation. And I'm glad that even the stuff that we don't invest in, someone hopefully will, for whatever reason, fund it, and we'll get to see whether the unlikely experiments turn out to work and an entire new field like immuno-oncology is born.
I'm just going to follow up on what Peter said. If you look at what exactly that example, immuno-oncology, immunotherapy, when I was in graduate school, was, I don't want to say the redheaded stepchild. Nobody, there was a department and nobody believed in it. Nobody thought anything was going to come of it. And now look at it. Now it's truly pivotal to our war on cancer. Now, granted, I think it's going to have to be coupled with other solutions, but it's going to be one of the mainstay therapies. What does that say? It says we don't know. We don't know what's going to be working in 10, 15, 20 years. And for a good part of that, things haven't even come to fruition yet or been invented. At Startup Health, we have an interesting way of investing, and that is as we bring companies into our portfolio, and we have about 166 now, just like the war on cancer, it becomes about the data. We crunch the numbers, we follow, we're actively involved in what's going on in the company. And you don't know what's going to work and what doesn't. You have to have a varied solution or group of solutions. You have to see what works and what doesn't work. The other thing is we invest in people, right? I can't tell you how many companies, and if you think about some of the main therapies, they were invented by accident, or a company pivoted, and now all of a sudden they have a therapy or a digital solution. And so we're looking at all of the different solutions, and then we try to make, an educated guess. But the truth is, that's exactly what it is, an educated guess. If anybody tells you they have the solution and the exact formula for investing and it works every time, give them my number.
Look, this is the art of investing, right? Because you're trying to, in venture investing, in company building, you're trying to push the edge in emerging fields of science and medicine. You're trying to make a tremendous difference for patients. And the fundamental answer to your question is, it's really hard to do. That's why ultimately you need to have a very substantial return if you're successful at doing it. If you're doing a typical oncology therapeutics company where you think you have a new science and technology and approach that you think might create several really meaningful new product opportunities, from the time you start that company to the time that you get really definitive clinical proof of concept, in the best of cases, you're going to be looking at something that's going to take 5 to 6 years, and it's going to cost $150 to $250 million. And that's to get to your initial clinical proof of concept. Mm-hmm. If you're then going to go from there to getting that drug registered, again, in the best of cases, assuming you have a spectacular effect, that it really, really works well, you know exactly what patients to put it in, and that you can then move it through to approval in a 4-year period of time, which is an extraordinarily aggressive path, you're going to spend another $500 million to $750 million from the time that you had that clinical proof of concept to the time that that product actually starts generating positive cash flow returns back to you. So you put that together, that's not a risk-adjusted or phantom calculation. That's $1 billion and 10 to 11 years. And that is a remarkable success.
Not even a little risk-adjusted?
What was that?
Not even a little phantom?
No, saying for that in terms of actual out-of-pocket dollars.
But
Crunch some math together.
Happy to lay it out entirely.
I keep meeting companies that say, we're going to file for approval soon, and it's taken us 3 or 4 years.
Not from the start of trying to discover a drug. If a company has in-licensed a product from someplace else.
From from a university or something.
No, not in-licensing from a university. The standard path of any molecule, and these numbers are been studied multiple times, I think are very non-controversial. Your average time for a particular molecule that you take before you get into the clinical testing is about 4 years, okay? If you're starting a company that is starting up from the very beginning in an area and doesn't have a molecule yet, you have a little bit of assembly time there itself, 1 to 2 years. So there you're at your 5 to 6 years. From the time you dose your first patient in the clinic, in cancer, the fastest ever approval, the fastest ever going from first patient to approval from the FDA was in the 3 to 4 year time window. That's an N of literally 1 or 2. If you're looking at the hundreds of drugs in the last decade or two that have been approved in cancer.
Well, but that's an unfair example, because if you look back for the last decade or two, we're looking at a completely different model for drug development.
No. Look, there's only been literally
all the kind of brute force.
So that's why I'm saying, for a modern cancer drug that is a precision-targeted drug, which is separate from the immuno-oncology drugs, which are getting even more difficult as you go into sort of the combination regimens. But so in the best-case scenario, where you have a precision oncology drug, you know exactly what patients to put it in, and you have a tremendous effect size, that's going to be about a 4 to 5 year path from the time you first dose in clinic to the time it's approved. That's going to be your average path. Today, with the most aggressive stance by the FDA, with sort of all the cutting edge deployment, if you get, if you are on the extreme fast side of that, 3.5 years, it's hard to go past that.
Well, what about Juno? I mean, Juno started 2013, and they could be filing shortly, sometime in the next year, right? I mean, that's And the company started in 2000. Does that fit with your?
The company started. They licensed research that had been ongoing for a very long time,
Right.
at a number of institutions. And credit goes to academia for doing some of the absolute craziest stuff where people just tell you, oh, that'll never work.
Right. That was totally not going to be funded. As you said, that was in an area that was just considered out.
Credit to the governments, non-profits, the people that believe in wacky stuff for funding something, and then they cure some patients. And the investment world, the business world takes an interest and goes big, pumps huge amounts of dollars into then trying to make CAR-T technology broadly applicable, and still is trying to crack the code for how to make that technology work in solid tumors. The majority of the cancers that are out there. So far, the proof of concept has been in a very small number of cancers.
Well, and so far, to be clear, there's been have not been able to figure out how to make it work in solid tumors. It has worked in a very tiny minority of cancers.
Yep.
Right?
But there are billions going into it, so I'm optimistic that we might get lucky. And there are going to be lots of people that come through our office, they come through your office, I'm sure, and they say, I don't need luck. Here's exactly the reason why my version will work. The trouble is, if you then ask someone else, they'll say, oh, no, that'll never work. Now, one of those people is right. We just don't know how to figure out which of those people is right. And so to us, that looks like luck. No, it will either work or it will not work. That is guaranteed.
But there must be some examples of drugs where you've invested in them and people have said, that's never going to work, and it didn't.
Oh, yeah.
No. And you were like, darn,
if you would like to be 96%, if you want an A in investing, all right, just say no to everything. You're like 96% right. That's awesome. Well done, right? Except you will not have a very good investing track record, right? So inflation, if it ever rears its head, will eat away your money. Though maybe just sitting on your cash is going to be a good thing. That's what I read The Economist for to tell me. But you have to take some chances.
No, please, no, do not.
So European governments will pay you to
spend.
That's right. Make some money. So you have to take some chances, and that's where it becomes risky. You can no longer say no, and you might have only an 80% batting average, right? But that could actually be amazing, right? Because you can only lose 100% of your money on a biotech. That's it, only 100%. But think about the value that you create when you're right? And as an investor, people will ask you, how do you manage your risk? Well, it's like you're going to war. If you basically accept that you're dead the moment that you step off the plane, then you're probably not going to be disappointed. There's only upside from there. So if you invest in a biotech company and you basically reconcile yourself to losing all your money,
so optimistic.
Then you will be pleasantly surprised if you don't lose all your money, and you might just occasionally turn out to be right, lucky. Who can tell? Better lucky than good.
Bond Evans, CEO of Cerimity. So I'm thinking, all of your, based on the previous conversation, all of your ventures are going to be high risk, especially the more inventive it is, it's going to be high risk. Can you walk us through how you choose or select an investment based on how the team is minimizing those risks? And I understand it's situational, depending on the situation, but I'm thinking there's probably some things that transcend each venture and how they go about minimizing their risk. And if you could talk about how you make your selection in that way, that would be good.
Great question. Who wants to answer that one?
Peter?
I'll take it. So what we want to understand is how a team has thought through the timeline and the trial design that, or a series of trials really that they're going to do, in terms of if we see this, then what does that mean? What will we do, right? If they've basically mapped out that that choose your own adventure, essentially, that lays ahead of us, and have a cogent answer for what they will do in each situation, then it makes you feel like you're investing with a competent, thoughtful team. And it's really a question of, all right, are you prepared to take those risks? It's very hard to iron out and insist, well, no, I want more data than what you've got. If they say, well, I don't have those data. I need the money to generate the more data to further de-risk this. So if it's clear to me that there are just certain risks, biological risks or whatever, that we're forced to take, then I can ultimately reconcile myself with those, and I may or may not invest. But if I see that the people haven't even thought through the way that the dominoes may fall and haven't prepared themselves to respond, if they aren't hedging for potential failure of this drug by maybe developing different versions of that drug, so that if you have liver toxicity with one variant, well, we'll try a different one that gives us a different shot on goal. But our overarching thesis doesn't necessarily die just because one of our molecules causes liver tox. If I see that they're sort of failing to anticipate all those things, now I'm taking people risk, right? Management risk, and that just feels like gratuitous risk. So sometimes you have to take that risk anyway. Maybe the data are so great and so compelling that you're willing to invest with a management team that hasn't solved it all, but then you're probably thinking about putting part of your money in, rolling up your sleeves, helping them to work through these issues, bringing in other executives and experts to solve it before you put even more money to work, right? And that's where an investor's job becomes more than just allocating money, but really to be a partner to the entrepreneurs and lend them all of the things that you've learned over the years from other great teams, right? If investors might be thought of as like Siskel and Ebert, they're constantly criticizing other people's movies, and if you don't like what they say, you can say, well, what movies have you created? Have you ever produced anything? No, but we have watched so many films that we kind of know what's going to work well and what won't. We have a few ideas for you to consider for which actors to work with, maybe how your ending should play out. You can ignore them.
Are you Siskel or Ebert?
Who's the thin one? So you can ignore them, but at your peril, right? We've been trained by so many smart people, right? So what we're saying, it's not our insight. It's the insight that we glean from somebody else or maybe 10 other people over the years.
We have a question from the app. Does anyone want to take this? Does the timeline differ for devices versus drugs? Is that something anyone can answer?
Yeah, the thing about devices, and this is true in diagnostics as well as devices at the moment, you get a little bit of a double jeopardy. So the world has begun to demand higher levels of clinical evidence for devices and diagnostics than it used to be convinced that it works. So you have your path first through to FDA approval if it's a device. And again, what FDA is asking for is more than what it used to be. So that path begins to look more like a drug. But upon approval from the FDA, whereas if you have a breakthrough drug, you will get almost immediate reimbursement broadly from payer systems or relatively abbreviated negotiations if you take it from a global perspective. With a device that doesn't come immediately in place, and they want real-world experience use before you can get broad-scale reimbursement, which basically means you have an extended period of time that can take another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And this is the same thing is true on the diagnostic side after a product is launched. So you're taking on, in many ways, a similar type of technological risk or clinical risk, but you have this extended period of time. You basically have to get the product all the way to market and then to sales, usually on the order of 2 to 3 years of sales to establish what the sales pattern looks like before you will then get further recognition of value, be that from public investors or from the large strategic company in the device world.
Time to commercial success is not necessarily shorter, but oftentimes the intellectual property barrier to entry is lower, so you end up competing with multiple players. Therefore, the amount of profits that accrue to the winner smaller. You're sharing it with more. So that makes it a bit less compelling than drugs for some investors. But people that are knowledgeable in the space, they are very much focused on med devices and will have all sorts of terrible things to say about drug development.
Now, it's my task to deliver the results to this polling question. Will the next few years see an increase or decrease in disruptive startups in the healthcare space? And the answer is, magically, could someone reveal this? An increase, 80%. Do you guys all agree with that? Does that?
I want to interview the 20%.
Yeah, there's absolutely going to be an increase in disruptive startups, and we're seeing that now. We've been seeing it and watching it for the last 5 years. It's increasing, whether it's coming out of clinicians, whether it's coming out of pharma, whether it's coming out of people who have just had experiences within the medical community. Disruption is never been seen the way it's been seen now. I think that in the next 10 to 20 years, the way we treat patients, the solutions that we give are going to be as different as like a pre-antibiotic era. I mean, we're going to see some major changes.
Would any of the 5 people who said decrease give us a reason? I mean, because maybe we're missing something and find another line of work.
Okay, now I'm going to get into trouble if I don't wrap up now. Unfortunately, so please, if you think there's going to be a decrease in innovation, please find these gentlemen at the reception later.